Good morning. I think we'll make a start. Welcome to the Safeguarding Overview and Scrutiny Committee today, the 6th of July. Do we have any apologies?
Yes, Chair, we have apologies from Councillor Mike Wilcox this morning.
Thank you. Any declarations of interest? Councillor?
I'd like to declare an interest in item number 6. My daughter works at the Children's Centre as an early years coordinator.
Thank you for that. Any others? Item 3 then, minutes of the Safeguarding Overview and Scrutiny Committee held on the 17th of June. I assume everyone's had the opportunity to read them. If I could go through them just for accuracy. Page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7. And are there anything anyone wishes to raise? Everyone happy that I sign them as a true and accurate record? Thank you. Item 4, which is the first report that we have today around domestic abuse. Councillor Wilson, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, everyone. It's lovely to see you all. So you'll have read the report. The report is there to provide an update on the domestic abuse services across Staffordshire and Stoke, and was previously shared with the Safer and Stronger Scrutiny Committee in October 2020. The report is intended to provide an update of progress since then. The report provides information about the commissioned domestic abuse support service provision, including the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. It also provides updates on key pieces of work associated with domestic abuse. Members will recall that Staffordshire County Council, Stoke-on-Trent City Council and the Staffordshire Commissioner's Office have jointly commissioned domestic abuse services across Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent, with the SCO acting as lead commissioner. Services include provision for victims, perpetrators, children and young people. The service is provided by Victim Support, who provide a service for victims of domestic abuse, and the Reducing Reoffending Partnership, who provide services for perpetrators of domestic abuse. And together they operate under the brand of New Era. The contract for this provision was awarded in 2018 and has recently been extended to September 2023. I'd like to highlight and draw members' attention to the following paragraphs within the report. Paragraph 5 outlines the financial contributions to the contract from Staffordshire County Council, Staffordshire Commissioner's Office and Stoke-on-Trent City Council. The overall annual contract value for victim and perpetrator provision is £2,157,000. County Council's annual contribution is £670,490, and this equates to 31% of the annual value of the contract. Paragraphs 8 to 11 provide up-to-date performance information across both perpetrator and victim elements of service provision broken down by district. The report includes the total number of referrals since the commencement of the contract in 2018 and also includes the latest quarter 4, that's January to March 2021 figures. Paragraphs 12 to 20 outline the impact of COVID on service delivery, including increase in demand following an initial dip in referrals at the start of the first lockdown. Increase in demand has led to waiting lists, although the triage process is in place seeks to ensure that waiting is kept to a minimum for those who are identified as high risk. Increase in complexity of need for those individuals who are presenting to the service. Change in delivery model away from face-to-face to a virtual offer in line with COVID restrictions, and impact on staffing levels. Paragraphs 21 to 28 outline the response to COVID and the mitigating actions we and the service have taken to respond to the impact. These include weekly meetings for both commissioned and non-commissioned providers to coordinate a joined-up response throughout each lockdown period, identifying additional resource to address demand and to increase staffing capacity, adapting delivery methods to new ways of working. The report notes services retained their front door victims and their families, and the perpetrator programme has been adapted appropriately. For both victim and perpetrator services, availability of support and services has been maintained throughout the pandemic. This has been largely via remote working arrangements and online delivery, but with some face-to-face support where appropriate and safe to do so. Adapting the children and young children's perpetrator programme offered to ensure we're making best use of the capacity available across the whole contract and that we're meeting the needs of children and young people in the most appropriate way. Continuing to promote the service both externally to communities and improving communications amongst practitioners internally. Included in the other elements of the report, we have paragraphs 29 to 32, which outlines the work underway to design and roll out the audit specialist worker model, which supports interventions with families where there are safeguarding concerns, with a focus on adult risk factors, for example, substance misuse, domestic abuse, financial exclusion, and mental health. The principle is that addressing the parental risk factors will support in reducing the risks to the children and young people in the household. Paragraphs 33 to 35 give an overview of the statutory domestic abuse safe accommodation duty, which has been placed on upper tier local authorities and outlines Staffordshire's response to date. And I believe a document has come out from Robert Jenrick on that. Not sure if you've seen that. Paragraphs 36 to 40 gives an up-to-date position on domestic homicide reviews, which are underway in the county. My recommendation is that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee review and comment upon the content of this report concerning domestic abuse. Chairman, I will now hand over to Becky Murphy, who will talk further to some of the key areas from the report, and then we'll invite questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Becky.
Thank you. So I'm Becky Murphy. I'm a Senior Commissioning Manager here at Staffordshire County Council. There were just a couple of things that I wanted to highlight for members' attention. So I understand that members have previously asked for confirmation that appropriate links are being made between services who support children in relation to child exploitation and also services who provide support around domestic abuse.
Becky, I just wondered if I could ask you to put the microphone. I know it's a bit intrusive, but you need...
Is that better,
right,
Chair?
that's much better.
Right,
thank
sorry.
You. Yeah.
Do you want me to repeat what I've said? Did people... No, okay, thank you. So specifically the question from elected members was around whether information is shared between those services, so services who provide support around child exploitation and services that provide support around domestic abuse. So it was just to bring to members' attention that there are multi-agency child exploitation panels, or MACE panels, that have been established across the county. These are the partnership forums that have been set up to enable a joined-up response to children and young people who are identified as being exploited or at risk of child exploitation. I can confirm today that New Era, as our domestic abuse provider, does attend the MACE panels regularly. Domestic abuse is considered as a risk factor at those panels, so information is shared through that forum. New Era participate in the discussions there. They're involved in the problem solving and interventions that are put in place, and they work with other partners to deliver those joined up interventions which protect and support children and young people who are at risk of child exploitation. The other item I wanted to draw your attention to was that I understand that members have also asked specifically about the increase in referrals to services and how they compare with referrals to Staffordshire Police. As outlined in the report, we have seen, although there wasn't an increase at the start of the pandemic, since November onwards we have seen quite a significant increase in referrals to our commissioned domestic abuse support services. What we haven't seen is a similar increase to the police in Staffordshire, and actually it's about the same as it was previously. So what we're doing at the moment, a piece of analysis is being undertaken to really get underneath those figures to understand why we have seen a 30% increase to services and we haven't seen a corresponding increase to the police. Once we understand what the data's telling us and understand the reasons behind that, we can take any appropriate mitigating actions. So I don't have the answer today because that analysis is actually underway at the moment, but we can report back to you on a later stage as to what our findings are and what action we've taken to mitigate against that. They were the two things that I really wanted to draw members' attention to, and then would open for questions.
Thank you for that. Perhaps I could start then just on those 2 points where you're talking about sharing information. I think the issue previously was making sure that we had this joined up approach so that young people don't, or we don't miss them. I know at the one end when it comes to young people going missing, we have an organisation called Catch 22, which I understand is also a part of these committees. My concern around some of that, and the same with New Era, because they will be coming across young people in domestic abuse situations, is that they may well bring some information to the hubs that you were talking about, which I think is to be applauded. However, is there a broader intelligence sharing that goes on? Because it strikes me, and in my previous role as a police officer, of course, that the police guard their information and intelligence quite well. But actually, it is about sharing that so that when New Era go to domestic violence, they might even have a heads up about what they ought to be looking for. I suppose, I don't know if you have the answer, but are we at that level of sophistication when it comes to sharing information, or is it just at the hubs, and hope that the people that turned up to the incident also turn up to the committee? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My understanding is that those MACE panels are well attended, and the police would also have a seat round that table, and there are information governance arrangements in place. So you're absolutely right. And quite rightly, people are careful about the information that they share. My understanding is that at the MACE panels, because of the information governance arrangements in place, the information can be shared from a number of sources. So you're absolutely right, Catch 22 and New Era would both be there sharing their information. Police would also be enabled to share their information through that forum as well. Does that respond to your question, Chair?
Yes, it does. And I think it speaks volumes that that has been recognised some time ago, actually because it is difficult to maintain that intelligence flow. So I do think it's hugely encouraging to see that we have these hubs, and actually the people that will have that information being invited to them. Also, just on the second point that you raised there about the local authority, I think you said having greater or an increased number of referrals to the police. I personally think that's quite a positive. I do think, being an emergency service, most people call the police when they're in some sort of crisis. But actually, when they're out of immediate crisis, I think it's encouraging that we have contact as a local authority or as a partnership with people that need that help and support. So I have to say that's what I would have expected to see, and I think it's encouraging to see that. So it will be interesting to see what this research brings up. I think just a couple of general points on the report. It's very detailed, and thank you for that. When it comes to getting value, it looks like Staffordshire County does very well. We pay 30% and get 60% of the service. So I don't think we can argue with the fact that we're not. So and it is important to recognise perhaps the contributions that other people make, particularly when, and I forget what paragraph it was in, but we had something like 100% satisfaction rates with the people who use the service, and it only dropped down to 97 with those who have more targeted provision. So I think it's, unless people are going to disagree, I think it's good value for the service that is provided. Just a couple of other points on the chart at the bottom of page 10, and a couple of them, I think it was Cannock, Lichfield and Tamworth in particular, have shown an increase over the last quarter. At my rudimentary maths, that looks like around a quarter to me, which is quite a large increase around that. Do we have any idea why some areas do seem to be seeing such a significant increase and some of the others even seeing a decrease?
I think we have seen since the start of the contract, so we do monitor those referral figures on a quarterly basis, more frequently actually during the pandemic period, and we do see that there are fluctuations throughout. So certainly we have had a look at the figures, and we do at each quarter to see if there are any anomalies. In terms of the fluctuations that are reflected in that report, there aren't really any correlating particular issues in that area. It does look like normal fluctuations, so you will see from quarter to quarter, sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down. The trend overall, though, is on an upward trajectory at the moment, we think partly as a result of the pandemic. Also, if we do any sort of targeted communication campaigns, this also is sometimes a corresponding upturn in the number of referrals. But as I say, this quarter, it appears to be normal fluctuations. There doesn't appear to be any particular issues within those areas that we need to be concerned about. But as I say, we do monitor that on an ongoing basis to make sure that's the case and that we don't actually need to be doing anything specifically within those areas.
No, thank you for that. Again, very reassuring. With regard to perpetrators, the report goes into some detail around that. Should I or should we be concerned that the number of perpetrators that referred, what is less than 10% of the number of people who are offending? And also, there did seem to be a slight disparity between, I think, Stoke and Staffordshire Council. In as much as, for example, Staffordshire Council, we have, two-thirds of the incidents of domestic violence, yet we only make referrals for half the number of perpetrators. Is there any work ongoing, or is there a reason why? Because I think if we could make a difference around people, especially those that are described as serial offenders, and we then end up with serial victims, of course, we could make a very big difference to the suffering that some families have. Thank you.
Indeed, and I think it is a fair comment that there is work to do around increasing the numbers of referrals into the perpetrator programme. I think historically the approach to domestic abuse has traditionally been to focus on the victim rather than the perpetrator, and I think we have taken strides forward in that actually the perpetrator work is now an embedded part of our domestic abuse response. Historically that wasn't the case, it was very much a focus on victims. But as you've rightly indicated, in order to turn off the tap of domestic abuse, if you like, actually it's not just about supporting the victim, it's about addressing that root cause and behaviour. So I think there is work to do. I think it's partly a cultural thing about getting people to understand that actually, although providing support and safety for the victim is absolutely paramount, that actually we also need to be addressing the perpetrators within the household. I think that's a work in progress. I think we are doing more to raise awareness of that across practitioners to let them know that service is available. The other thing I'd just like to note in terms of the perpetrator provision provided under our commission contract is that is a voluntary programme, and actually so perpetrators do need to have some degree of motivation to change their behaviour. Now, in terms of other perpetrator programmes, there are court-mandated programmes where perpetrators are, if you like, obliged to attend as part of that arrangement with the court. In terms of what we commission locally, it's that voluntary offer. So all of the perpetrators on the programme, although the numbers may be relatively small when compared with the population of people who are experiencing domestic abuse, all of those people have made some indication that they are there because they actively want to change their behaviours. But I think it's a fair point that we do have more work to do across the workforce and across the community to get people to understand that actually behaviours can be changed.
No, thank you for that. Last two really, both on perpetrators. When we were looking before about those areas that have an increase in the numbers of domestic abuse. And we look at the referrals for perpetrators, sort of Cannock and Lichfield, which were previously showing quite significant increases. We see decreases in, and I know the numbers are very small to put percentages on, but decreases around 20 and even 50% in the number of people that are referred, which seems counterintuitive, doesn't it, that we have something significantly increasing in two areas, yet in both of those areas we have a reduction in the service that we can provide that would make a real difference to people's lives. And the last point, you'll be pleased to hear, is that I've noticed there's no mention in here of repeat offenders or even repeat victims, of course. And I think there's quite a lot of evidence to suggest that if you want to tackle domestic violence, given the fact that many are serial offenders, and actually having a positive impact on a small number of offenders does have a much bigger impact on the overall issue. So I just wonder, is there any work around repeat victims and repeat offenders? Thank you.
Indeed, yes, absolutely. So in response to the first question with regard to the perpetrator programme and about the dip in referrals in some areas, one of the things that I would note that has been particularly challenging for the perpetrator programme during the pandemic is that the perpetrator programme is designed to be delivered as a group work exercise rather than one-to-one. So that there is some peer support and peer challenge. Clearly during the pandemic and the lockdowns with all of the social distancing requirements, etc., they have had to deliver that programme as a one-to-one, which has reduced the number of perpetrators that they have been able to see. As these restrictions are now lifting, we are hoping that we'll quickly be able to return to group work, which means that we will then be encouraging more referrals. So we will be actively going out there promoting the service, which we have been a little bit more reluctant to do during the pandemic because of the restrictions on the way that that programme's delivered. In terms of repeat offenders, there's a piece of work that's been undertaken by Chief Superintendent Jenny Mattinson at Staffordshire Police, where they are interrogating the data about repeat victims and repeat offenders, again in a similar way that we're looking at the other analysis, to identify what's the cohort we're talking about, what are the issues that that cohort is facing, and what actions can we put in place to mitigate that. So again, although I haven't got the details of that to report today because the work is undergoing, at the last Domestic Abuse and Commissioning Board, it was reported that that would be brought back. It will be reflected in our domestic abuse strategy, which is being reviewed, and will also reflect it in the action plans that are being developed. So it's something that the board are very conscious of and know that it's something that we do need to address, but we need to understand what the data's telling us to begin with.
No, thank you for that. And again, I think it's very encouraging that you're already ahead of the game, you're already thinking of these things. The last point I would make as well is around the mitigating actions, paragraphs 20, I think it was, to 27. I think that's very impressive, I have to say. And I think we would send a huge vote of thanks to the people who managed to keep that service going, and I think they worked very hard, so thank you for that. Are there any other questions? Yeah.
My question's really around when someone gets in contact with you and they're in a violent situation, how long does it take you to get them out of that situation? Because I've had horror stories where someone's been left there and they've been badly beaten, they've got children watching, and it's taken a long time for the police to respond and for some services to get them out of that situation into a safe house.
Yes, so in terms of our commission services, individuals are risk assessed at the point of referral, and for those families who are in a high risk situation, the response is put in place within a matter of hours. However, what I would say is not all victims and families wish to be removed from the situation. So while there are refuge accommodation places in Staffordshire and beyond, if families need to go further afield, that arrangement can be put in place, but the response is not all. It's about making sure that we can make those families as safe as possible, because actually on many occasions the family and the individual choose not to actually be taken out of that situation. So I absolutely acknowledge what you're saying in terms of, you know, if they are within a violent situation, to take them out of it absolutely would be the response, but actually it's very much victim-led, family-led in terms of what the response is that they want. So safety plans are put in place. In terms of our commission service, triage happens at the point of referral. A decision is made based on the evidence as to the risk that is being experienced. So if it is a high violence situation, the perpetrator is still in the household, safety planning can begin with a matter of hours and an IDVA is allocated. In terms of actually moving out of the family home, that's dependent on what's wanted and also the availability of refuge spaces both locally and across the country.
Becky, thank you for that. Is there any more questions? Yeah. Councillor Waring.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Becky, for the information so far. I just wanted to ask about the perpetrator service on paragraph 13. It mentions a waiting list. You know, how long are people waiting to be able to access this service?
I have to say I don't have that figure immediately to hand, but I can certainly get it circulated to members after this. So we do regularly ask for waiting lists for both the victim and the perpetrator service. So, Chair, if you'd be happy, I can get that information circulated to you outside of the meeting, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. One more question. Paragraph 26 on the children and young people, the one front door. Are children being seen quicker because of this service we're providing with the one front door? Or could you explain a bit about it, please?
Yes, of course. So in terms of the children and young people service at paragraph 26, that's speaking specifically about the perpetrator element of the service. So the perpetrator programme is available for adults, but it's also available for children and young people. However, during the lifetime of the contract, it has been identified that many of the children that are referred into the perpetrator service are actually displaying behaviours, if you like, that they're mimicking or as a response to domestic violence in the home. So although they are displaying concerning behaviours, actually they may not be perpetrators, if you like, in their own right, and we certainly don't want to label any child in that way. So what we've actually done is, rather than have children referred to the perpetrator service, all children are referred to the victim service, where an assessment is done of the risks, the needs, the behaviours, and identified which is the most appropriate service. So if they go to the perpetrator or the victim service, certainly their own behaviours will be addressed, will be tackled, will be talked about, but also support is put in place for children who are also victims. And in response to your question, that has sped things up, because obviously it enables that service to be broader. So rather than that service solely being delivered by the perpetrator service, which was delivered by the Reducing Reoffending Partnership, it will now be delivered by the National Probation Service because of those changes. It's now being delivered by both victim and perpetrator elements of the service. So we have increased capacity for children and young people in that way.
Thank you for that. Any more questions? Yeah. Councillor Podesi.
Thank you, Chair. Just two very quick questions. The Domestic Abuse Act, does that now give access to women with access to services for women with no recourse to public funds? That's my first question. And secondly, very quickly, in relation to funding, there's mention of a new model, a 2021, the Canet model. Is that increased funding, or is that coming from our original pot? And similarly, the increased funding of 1.5 million, is that something that will be renewed on an annual basis? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. So I'll take those questions in order, if that's okay. So the new Domestic Abuse Act does make reference to individuals with no recourse to public funds. Again, that is something that I'd like to take outside of this meeting to understand so I can answer your question accurately. So certainly it does make reference to that, but in terms of their increased rights and access to services, I will need to look into that and get back to you if that's okay. In relation to the question, so I think it's the section around adult specialist workers, and that's the pilot that's been delivered in Cannock and has just come to an end. That has actually, the funding for that work is part of the Children's Transformation, which is currently underway. So it's part of the additional investment that's being made into children's services. Some of that is being used to support the adult specialist worker model. So the pilot has been in place in Cannock for the last 12 months. We're now just developing what that county-wide model will look like, and that will be rolled out across the county using additional funds. So that is additional funding. The final point you made with regard to the £1.5 million, that's in relation to the new safe accommodation duty which has been introduced as part of the Domestic Abuse Act. MHCLG, so Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, obviously we are now under a statutory duty and there will be funding to support that statutory duty. What MHCLG are not able to tell us at the moment is how much we'll get beyond this year. So we know we've got 1.5 million for the current financial year. We expect to get more for future financial years, but we don't know what that balance will be and won't know until after the spending review in the autumn.
Becky, thank you very much for that. That was really helpful. I think all we've been asked to do is note and comment on the progress. So thank you for noting our comment, I suppose. Thanks very much. Thank you. Item 5, Together for Children, Regional Permanency Partnership Update briefing on page 17. Could I, as you probably will be able to see on the screen shortly, Councillor Mark Sutton is having to isolate, so he's making his presentation from home. If I could just remind all members to try to speak directly into the microphone, especially when you are at a satellite from here. It's very difficult to hear what's being said. So, Councillor Sutton, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to confirm, because I can't see on screen, that Scott Crawford is with us today to do to help with the presentation. Yes, he is. Yes. Yeah, that's lovely. Thank you very much. Well, good morning to members across the chamber. What we're going to do today is talk a little bit about Together for Children Permanency Partnership Update. Now, this is an item that came to the predecessor committee on a number of occasions. In summary, what we're asking today for the committee to have a little look at is this as a update. It's a partnership between ourselves, Shropshire Council, Stoke-on-Trent City Council and Telford and Wrekin Council, and it came out of the government's idea of ensuring that there was regionalisation of adoption agencies, and we've gone together with those 3 other local authorities with really a view to do something a little bit more than just adoption in the longer term. But at the moment, it's mainly around the adoption agenda. So what we're really looking to as our vision is to ensure that children achieve emotional, physical and legal permanency and grow up in a loving home with adults who provide them with a strong sense of security, continuity, commitment and identity. And working together with other local authorities helps us to do that in a better way, because we can collectively use our resources to recruit, assess and support prospective adopters across the whole of that region, so in effect giving us a greater pool, and therefore improve the quality and the speed of being able to match a child with adopters. and that provides high quality support to children. So Scott Crawford, who is head of Together for Children, is here, will be able to take you through the detail of the report, and then be able to, between us, be able to answer questions any members might have today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for that. Scott, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. Good morning to members. I'm going to have to flip between my reading glasses and the other glasses that I can see everyone with until I get to the opticians and get a new pair of varifocals. Thank you to Councillor Sutton. That was a really good introduction and background in terms of the Together for Children partnership. It is right that we have this piece of work started some time ago, back in 2016 ostensibly, when we started our negotiations and discussions with Stoke-on-Trent. It's been through various iterations in the intervening years, and the work started properly in 2018. Shortly afterwards, we received a grant from the DFE to support the transition work. It's been a big piece of transition work that's taken 2 years really to get to the point of launch. So we started off with 3 separate adoption agencies, a joint agency operating across Shropshire and Telford, and adoption agency services delivered by Stoke-on-Trent and Staffordshire. And we did the preliminary work to develop a single partnership model, so and also to develop the government arrangements behind that. So as we go through the report, you'll see that there is detail about the way that the governance structure has been set up between the 4 local authorities. It's fair to say it's quite a complex governance structure, because we have designed a model that is based around a hub and spoke model. So unlike a number of regional adoption agencies, probably the majority of regional adoption agencies, we chose a model where we weren't going to move all our staff into one agency. So many regional adoption agencies are hosted models whereby one local authority has taken over the whole of the adoption service delivery for a number of local council partners. We've got a slightly different model, so that we've really looked at the kind of core functions of what we want to deliver. Things like, having a really, really strong marketing and recruitment delivery, so that we can attract and we can support the recruitment of prospective adopters for our children. So we brought those elements together, and we brought what we call family finding elements together, whereby our practitioners match children, work with the children who need an adoptive home, and work with those families who could potentially provide that home to make those matches. Commissioning elements we've brought together, so my colleague Joe Sullivan in the room, who was also the project manager actually for the development of the partnership, so we've worked together very closely for about 3 years on this. But all the commissioning arrangements across the 4 local authorities that are directed at supporting adoptive families and supporting the delivery of our services have been brought together, and clearly there are some kind of cost benefits and some efficiencies within that model, as well as an ability to really carefully analyse our needs and commission the right services for our children and families. So all of these arrangements did come to each cabinet of the local authorities back in December 2019, January 2020. We were due to launch on the 1st of April 2020. That's what everything was building up to. And on about, I think it was about March the 20th, I think, Joe, we sat in a room and said, look, this isn't going to happen. There was obviously our partner local authorities had bigger fish to fry in terms of our launch. So we put our launch on hold for 6 months, but we did successfully launch in September. So at the end of September 2020, the 4 partners came together to begin the full-scale delivery of the adoption services across the 4 local authority areas. Now, the 6 months in between weren't wasted. We did a lot of work collaboratively. The 4 partners utilised the COVID-19 funding that the government made available to support adoptive families and those families caring for children on special guardianship orders. So collectively across the 4 local authorities we commissioned just under £250,000 worth of therapeutic and support provision for those families, which we commissioned and delivered during the course of the first 6 to 9 months of the COVID pandemic. So that was a really effective and strong piece of work, and really again allowed us to demonstrate the strengths of working in partnership across different local authorities. Of course, the other thing it enabled us to do was to really look at how we delivered. You know, as with all services, we were confronted with a really significant task in terms of how we assess families, how we place children, how we support those families, and how we do that in a remote way, how we do things like operate adoption panels. So very quickly over that 6 months, we utilised the technology that was available, and we moved to remote and hybrid models of delivery, which I think will serve us well going forward. One of the big questions that we always used to ask ourselves is, you know, how are we going to, as a service and a group of practitioners and managers, how are we going to operate across such a massive geographical region? And so there was all sorts of debates about mileage and work bases and how this was all going to work. And they have, I have to say, happily over the last year kind of evaporated into the mist of time, because we all now operate really effectively across that large geographical area. Our management teams meet together, our practitioner groups meet together really effectively. It will be very nice to get back into big rooms and do that culture and development building work that we have missed out on because of because of the circumstances of the Together for Children launch. But you know, I am happy to say that from a kind of practical operational level, actually, so you know, some of the learning from COVID has served us really well. So it's very early days yet, but I just wanted to talk through some of the kind of initial wins, if you like, from our first 6 months of, or where are we now, 9 months of full operational delivery. So we've got a really strong brand, Together for Children. We are finding is an effective brand. We've been really fortunate over the last 12 months in terms of the number of inquiries we've had from potential adoptive families, and we've been able to bring a high number of those families through our referral process and into assessment. So year on year, 2018 across the partnership, we approved 78 adopters. Last year we approved, 1920, we approved 85 adopters, and last year we were really successful in approving 102 adopter households. So that's the most across our 4 local authorities that we've ever managed to achieve previously, and that's really because we've, as I say, we've had a really strong marketing and recruitment offer. We've moved almost entirely to digital. We've got a very technically minded recruitment officer who manages all our activity online. That means we've got a better reach, and actually we can deliver our recruitment activity more cost effectively. So in terms of activity and outcomes for children, obviously last year was a really difficult year. Like other parts of the children's services world, we were deeply impacted. Obviously, any child who is moving through the process in terms of moving towards adoption is in care proceedings. The courts, both in the north of our region and down in Wolverhampton, were significantly impacted. There was a lot of delay. And then, as I've said, we had all of the practice issues to deal with in terms of how we deliver our service certainly during the first 2 periods of lockdown. But happy to say that despite all of that, we did manage to successfully place 102 children for adoption, and during that time 102 children received their adoption orders as well. In terms of placing children, one of the main aims of the partnership is to be able to place our children within regions, so within our wider geographical region. We're never going to have all of the families that we need to meet every individual child who needs an adoptive placement needs. So there is always going to be an element whereby we work across the nation in terms of all of the adopters available. And we still do that, so we do place children at a distance with other voluntary adoption agencies and with other regional adoption agencies. But a key aim of Together for Children is to make that the use of those placements at a distance, to lessen those as far as we possibly can, and to keep our children within a reasonable geographical distance to our practitioners and to our support services. We're very keen to offer that lifelong support to adopted children and their families, and to adopted adults as they move into adulthood, and quite often come back to our services to explore issues around their identity and explore potentially reconnecting with birth family members, etc., etc. So that's the aim of the region, and we're really happy that last year we were able to place 73% of all of those children, so the vast majority of those children were placed within region, and again we will hope to improve on that as each year passes. One of the key factors in terms of performance for children who need an adoptive home is the timeliness that the timeliness in terms of how long it takes for those children from entering care to moving in with their new adoptive family. So it has to be said that across the partnership that's been a challenge in the past year. We are generally speaking as a partnership in a reasonably good place. Staffordshire as a local authority has always had pretty good performance in terms of timeliness for children. But it's fair to say, and this will come out in the annual report when that's published, that there are some challenges in terms of timeliness, and that's kind of one of the key priorities again of the partnership in terms of improving that journey for the child, to ensure that they're matched and they move in with their adoptive families with the minimum of delay. So, of all the children who were adopted during the course of 2020-21, 23 of those children were over 5 years old. 28 achieved permanency in their new adoptive home alongside one or more of their siblings, and 11 children came from ethnic backgrounds other than white British. And usually, well, we know within the sector that children with those characteristics are more difficult to find adoptive homes for, and it usually takes longer. So again, I think it's just a demonstration of the ambition that we've got across Together for Children to ensure that we work as hard as we can to find families for all of our children. In terms of supporting families, we've got a strong partnership with Adoption UK, which is a nationwide voluntary organisation that is led and run by adopters. So Adoption UK have been integral in the development of the partnership. We've got Adoption UK provide an adopter advisory board that supports our management board and supports our operational managers in terms of providing feedback about the quality of service provision, and also helping us to identify and define the key priorities in terms of how we improve our services for adoptive families and children. We're also very, very lucky to be one of only 2 regional adoption agencies in England who were chosen to pilot a scheme called TESSA, which is run by Adoption UK, and that is an early intervention support service for adoptive families, providing some clinical input and then sort of a lot of scaffolding around peer support and peer group support. So that's currently funded through the Big Lottery Fund, Community Fund, and we've got that provision for the next year, and we're working in partnership with Adoption UK to think about how we make that, put that on a more sustainable footing. So going forward, in terms of our kind of key development priorities, we continue to work really hard to recruit the right families to meet our children's needs. So that's particularly families who would consider adopting siblings, those who'd consider adopting older children, children 5 and over, and families who represent our diverse demographic. So another key aim is to look at how we better deliver our support services, and again, working in partnership allows us to really do things at scale, so we're able to, and of course using remote and virtual means, we're able to bring our adopted community together much more effectively than we have been able to in the past. So we are developing opportunities to bring that community together all the time and to provide information, support and forums for that community. We're working effectively across the partnership to improve what we call early permanence. So that's where we place children with potential adopters early on in their care journey before the decision for adoption's been made by the court. So these are effectively foster carers who are set up to adopt the child in their care, should that be the decision of the court. This means that children experience less moves. So this is an area of practice that we really want to support and develop going forward. As I've said, performances in terms of timeliness has been a challenge, but going forward, we think regional family finding and our improved ability to assess and recruit families for our children mean that we can reduce the amount of time it takes to place our children for adoption where that's their plan. So again, we're working hard to address those issues. So in conclusion, despite the significant challenges over 2020-21, we have managed to successfully launch. Despite everything, we've delivered a strong brand. We've managed that design and delivery of remote provision, which will continue on in a kind of blended fashion as we move out of the pandemic. We've managed to deliver a number of regional workforce development events. We're building strong relationships with our partners, including the voluntary sector and other commission services. We did a really successful piece of work in terms of jointly delivering the COVID-19 Adoption Support Fund. Over 450 families benefited from that piece of work. And I've just lost my report because I've touched my screen. And we're continuing to integrate regional processes such as adoption panels as we go forward into the current year. Councillor Sutton did mention that we had a broader ambition as well. So just to finish off my run through of the report, just to say that we successfully launched last week our first Mockingbird family fostering model. Constellation they're called. So this is a model where an experienced foster carer provides support for a community of between 6 and 10 other foster carers. And they provide, if you like, the extended family to support those other foster carers. This is a accredited model. It was developed in the US. It's been rolled out very successfully in a number of local authorities across England and across the world, actually. But we are the first ever partnership to deliver Mockingbird across local authority fostering agencies. So usually it's embedded within one fostering agency within a local authority. So we've managed to work through the kind of mechanics of working in partnership across different fostering agencies in a similar way that we did when we were doing the work around adoption. And this has enabled us to deliver this first constellation, and we're looking to deliver over the course of the coming year 3 more constellations, 1 in each of our local authority areas. And so whilst the hub carer, who's the experienced carer who provides the support, is, if you like, linked to the fostering agency in one of the 4 local authorities, Constellation is made up of foster carers from different local authorities across the partnership. So that's an exciting piece of work and a kind of demonstration of, again, the way that we're using the governance arrangements and the operational arrangements and management arrangements of the partnership to really think about how we can deliver services that support permanency for children more effectively.
Scott, thank you for that. That was very detailed. Are there any questions? I think when you summed up there and said it's quite an exciting development, I do think it is. And I think we should, or you should, be commended for the fact that it does seem that we are part of a collection of local authorities that has taken that brave step to pull all this together and then delivered it also through some of the challenging times around COVID. And it was also interesting, I think, to hear that the aims and ambitions are significant of what you're trying to achieve, and from what Councillor Sutton was saying about even increasing or making those ambitions even broader is even more commendable. I know it's early days, and everything you read in here is a very good news story, and I'm sure that we all welcome that. I suppose we have to be realistic in these very challenging situations. And do we have a process, ongoing process of reviewing, like I say, some of these huge ambitions that we have about increasing the number of families that want to come forward, decreasing the amount of time taken? All of those, I'm sure, like I say, are very challenging. So do we have something in place that gives us that reassurance as we move forward?
Yeah, so again, within the detailed partnership agreement, the legal agreement that sits behind Together for Children, there's quite stringent governance and reporting arrangements. So again, across the partnership, it's supported by a raft of governance arrangements, including a performance board and a finance board. And they report into the regional management board. Within those governance arrangements, there's annual plan and annual reporting arrangements against. So there are kind of statutory requirements in terms of adoption that we report against, but in terms of the broader vision, it is fair to say that there's been some delay in terms of establishing the exact strategic priorities as we move forward. That's a piece of work that we're just coming back to now that we've kind of landed the adoption service delivery. So that's a part of the work plan for this year, is to come back as a group of senior managers to really identify the key strategic priorities that we are able to deliver, alongside Mockingbird, of course, in terms of the broader ambitions of the partnership.
No, that's excellent and very encouraging. Thank you again for that. Councillor Padesh.
Thank you, Chair. Just 2 very quick questions. The 3 categories of the priority children. I always thought that children with disabilities fell into that category as well. So some clarification on that, please. And lastly, the Mockingbird family model, does that work out more expensive than if we found our own foster parents, if we did that ourselves? Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so yes, children with disabilities are generally considered harder to place, to use the adoption parlance that we are trying to get away from, really. But yes, but actually we have very few children that we've placed, and from our statistics, it doesn't look like that's creating delay for those particular children. For us, the key, regionally, when we look at our demographic and look at our children who are waiting, it's actually boys aged over 5 who are we struggle to find placements for. And in terms of Mockingbird, they are all our own, so they're all the locality fostering agencies, foster carers. It's just the model that is introduced from the States. There's a bit of funding and a bit of cost in terms of getting the accreditation to run the model, but there are lots of evidenced savings and cost avoidance aspects to running Mockingbird, things like placement stability, clearly great outcomes for children as well, but there is also some financial benefit in terms of foster care retention, creating more stable placements. So there's quite a lot of detailed work in terms of costing the model for Mockingbird. Obviously, we've only got that in terms of the kind of evidence base that's been generated in the United States and the UK and elsewhere in the world. But the current Mockingbird rollout in the UK is being it is being researched. It's the evidence base is growing in the UK, and obviously we're utilising that to look at the outcomes, but B, also the cost effectiveness of the model.
Thank you. Councillor Eagland.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask a question about the Regional Management Board, please. Having been a member of the Corporate Parenting Panel for many years under the guidance of Mark Sutton, which is very good, I'd like to know about how often does this board meet? I'd like to know how the chairman was nominated. And I wondered if you could, or Mark Sutton could tell me, how often do you review this situation? Is it done on your work programme? We've got a very good reputation in the past of adoptions. I would hate to see it fall away because of this four-stringed episode. Thank you.
So the management board meets bi-monthly, every 2 months. The current chair is Karen Bradshaw, who's the Director of Children's Services in Shropshire. The board is made up of representation at Assistant Director level across the 4 local authorities and myself. So it's all of the Assistant Directors who are responsible for adoption service delivery, and it is chaired, and again this is written into the governance arrangements, it's chaired by one of the Directors of Children's Services across the partnership. It won't be chaired by Helen Riley in this case in terms of Staffordshire, and that's because Staffordshire are the legal host of the arrangements, so it's always going to be chaired by one of the other Directors of Children's Services. But Staffordshire have equal representation on the board currently through Deborah Ramsdale.
Thank you for that. No more. Councillor Sutton, did you want to add anything?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, not particularly. I think Scott has covered the whole report in quite some detail, and the only other issue I might raise a little bit is that clearly adoption and how successful we are or otherwise is something that the Corporate Parenting Panel has to have a report on every year, so that will not change with this current setup.
Yes, thank you for that. No other questions. Scott, thank you very much indeed for that. It was very comprehensive. Moving on to item 6, developing family hubs in Staffordshire, page 25. And Mark, I think this is you again. Is that right, Councillor Sutton?
Yes, it is, and I understand that although I can't see in the room that Becky Murphy has stayed for this along with Joe Sullivan. So those are the officers who are here to be able to support me in this. I think that family hubs this report is a really exciting development going forward, and it comes out of a manifesto pledge from the government that seeks to bring partners together, to a whole family approach to tackling the root causes, such as relationships, financial support, and assistance, skills, employment, parental support, to seek the mechanism for families to seek earlier information, advice, and referrals to all local services. And this report really is very early in the development of the hubs. So this is really an opportunity for the committee to see how we're starting along that track, and to input ideas and thoughts around the national context, the local vision that we're trying to look at going forward, and how incrementally the family hubs will develop. So this is, as I've said, a very early stage, and we are really looking towards members of the committee for their thoughts as the sort of vision for how we develop across Staffordshire emerges going forward. I think we can all agree, and there's lots of scientific evidence, as well anecdotal evidence, that a child's early experience, in particular, plays a crucial role going forward in how they themselves, whether they start well at school, whether they grow well, and whether they live well. And all those aspects are things that we want to try and ensure that every child within Staffordshire has the opportunity to do. And we hope going forward that the family hubs will play a real keen part in that. So I'm not sure whether it's going to be Joe or Becky that starts to take us through the report. But Mr. Chairman, if I could hand over to one of them or both of them.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think it's Joe Sullivan. Over to you, Joe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Sutton. It's good to be with committee this morning to give an outline of the development of family hubs in Staffordshire. As Mr. Sutton has outlined, this is a very early conversation as we seek to grow and develop our approach to family hubs together with our partners and key stakeholders. Just to give a little bit of context, my name's Joe Sullivan, and I'm one of the senior commissioning managers within the Families and Communities Commissioning team, and I have responsibility for the development of family hubs, and inclusive of that, our children's centres. I'm also joined by Becky Murphy, who you met earlier, as our senior commissioning manager for early help. It's really important to acknowledge the development of family hubs sits across the entire children and family system and doesn't sit within one particular portfolio or area of work, and it also sits across the whole statutory and voluntary and community sector as well. The development of family hubs presents us a real opportunity to reflect in Staffordshire, led nationally, but an opportunity to reflect on how we provide support, information, advice, guidance and early help to all our children, families and communities. It also presents us an opportunity to build and grow the way we work together with our partners and the way that we work together with our community and voluntary sector organisations who are critical to our approach to supporting children and families. We know that the first 1,001 days for a child are one of the most critical periods during the life course of a human being. We know that it is critical that we get that first 1,001 days right to enable our children and their families to start well, grow well and live well. We know that if families get access to the right support, the right information, the right advice and the right guidance at that point, that we have a real opportunity to ensure that our children and our families do grow well into Staffordshire. We know that all of our families will require good quality support, information, advice and guidance. We know that this often starts with our partners within the midwifery system and goes on to many other partners as a child grows and develops following birth. We know that there are a range of good quality services, organisations across Staffordshire that work together with our families, and they are both provided by the local authority and statutory organisations, commissioned and also are developed within grassroots communities as well. We know that we have a range of services that are available to also provide that additional information, advice, guidance and support when families need it, including family support for our children and families. But whilst we believe we're in a very good position, we also acknowledge that our systems can be complex. There are a whole range of organisations available to families, which often leads families to tell their story numerous times. As someone who only 8 weeks ago had a new baby girl for the first time, I can recognise that actually there are a whole vast and range of services out there to support families as they start on that journey of parenthood. But I also recognise that during that time, I have shared the story of our family and where we're at numerous times and sought support from various routes. I also know that there are families that require that bit extra support and early help at the right time. And again, at times, this can be complex. The development of the Family Hub provides us an opportunity to bring our integrated working together, to build upon the position that we're currently in, and create one single route for all of our children and families, where they can access a range of services under one umbrella. Critically, the national thinking gives us the opportunity to think about how we share information in greater detail and how we ensure our pathways align. It's really important to recognise within all of those discussions that we're talking about developing and enhancing and growing our way forward. At the moment, we're looking to develop the foundations of the Family Hub. We know that developing family hubs and achieving our ambitions for our children, families and communities will take time by working together with our key stakeholders. And we want to take that opportunity to work with our partners, our children, our families and communities to develop our family hubs together. And that very journey starts here today. We also recognise that we have a number of opportunities over the coming 12 months to begin to set those foundations. In the committee report, we make reference to children's centres and also family support. Currently, our children's centres are delivered through a hybrid model, which includes a commissioned early years coordination service that provide the leadership and management for our early years and children's centres. We also have an in-house business support team that provide the support and expertise to the children's centres to coordinate our services. And we also have a whole range of other organisations who work within the children's centres, both commissioned, both provided, and our community and voluntary sector organisations. We want to take the opportunity that the Family Hub presents us to think about how our children's centres are structured in the future, to reflect upon how our children's centres can be redesignated to grow and develop into family hubs that work across the whole system, across the whole family, including 0 to 19 and beyond for our children and families with SEND. The committee report outlines the proposal to undertake a full review of our arrangements for supporting children's centres to encompass the Family Hub model, and that review is to focus on looking at the best practice, evidence, intelligence and what our key stakeholders are telling us so that we can make clear decisions in relation to how our family hubs are coordinated, managed, but whilst continuing to build and grow our children's centres and our statutory duties relating to early years. We also have an opportunity in relation to our arrangements for family support. And at this point, I'm going to hand over just briefly to Becky Murphy, who's going to briefly reflect upon family support.
Thanks, Joe. So as outlined in paragraphs 31 to 36 of the report, the current contractual arrangements for our commissioned family support services comes to an end in March 2022. So this service provides valuable support to children, young people and families who require additional support across a range of needs, so including things like parenting support, support with behaviours, school attendance, etc. The aim of the service is to provide help as early as possible to prevent needs from escalating and to support families to become independent and resilient. As such, this service makes a significant contribution to the achievement of our Building Resilient Families and Communities outcomes and targets. During the financial year 20 to 21, the service has supported over 1,300 families. Of these families, over 75% had successful outcomes which could be counted towards our Building Resilient Families and Communities targets, which are set for us by the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. As Joe said, provision of family support at the earliest opportunity is one of the foundations of the Family Hub model. So what we'd like to do is take this opportunity to work with partners to develop a service which allows for flexibility in provision and methods of delivery so that the service can be adapted to align with the Family Hub model which is currently emerging. Thanks, Joe.
Cheers, thank you, Becky. That concludes, Mr Chairman, our overview of the report. We're very happy to take any questions and comments and observations. I would also note, Mr Chairman, at this point, there is a proposal or an ask to return to scrutiny and oversight again within 12 months to continue to develop and grow the Family Hub.
Thank you both. Councillor Burnett.
As you know, I declared an interest at the beginning of this because my daughter works at the Children's Centre, and I've been quite concerned over the pandemic. The children's centres have been shut, and you keep saying that the first years of a child's life is the most important, and there's been a lot of children that have been born in this pandemic who've had no interaction with other children, with other parents. There's been new parents out there who've had no help at all. They haven't had even access to children's centre, health visitors or anything. How are we going to put that right? And how are we going to ensure that if anything like this happens again, that these people are not going to be left on their own totally? Thank you.
Thank you for that. Joe?
Thank you, Mr Chairman, and thank you for the observation and question. I think it is really important to acknowledge that the physical buildings of children's centres were required to be closed at the outbreak of COVID-19 under the appropriate legislation. I do think at this point it's a good opportunity to also reflect upon the work undertaken by the Early Years Coordination Service, who at the outbreak of COVID-19 developed 8 district virtual family hubs. Those family hubs began with an online presence where children and families and communities could make contact with the hub to seek information, advice, guidance and support. And a high number of families contacted the family hubs who supported families to seek support and services where required to support them through COVID-19. I think it's very fair to say that that was quite reactive to the COVID-19 outbreak and was mobilised quite quickly and has developed and grown over the last 12 months, particularly with the family hubs now having a full online presence to provide virtual support, but also providing phone contact and also where appropriate triaging to a range of services that responded through contingency planning. I think it's really important to say that we are currently working together across the whole partnership through our Early Years Advisory Board to look at how we really set our next steps into the future, acknowledging the challenges that COVID-19 have presented, but also some of the opportunities we have together as a partnership, which includes organisations across the statutory and voluntary community sector. We are developing a Best Start action plan and that Best Start action plan is seeking to think about how we ensure that that right support, that right information, advice and guidance is available to our children and families and communities, and that action plan is currently under development and is monitored through the yearly years advisory board. I think the second thing to say is that we're currently moving through our planning to reopen our children's centres and other services and provisions so that they are fully operational to where they were before COVID-19, but also building upon the learning of the last 12 months. That is taking time as we continue to await government guidance in relation to early years, and following the Prime Minister's announcement yesterday evening, we will also be awaiting updated guidance to understand how we can ensure that all of our children's centre services are returned. A number of our providers are being supported to operate in larger community facilities across the county. So a number of our early years providers who were not able to be available during the first lockdown did return after that lockdown, and that support is being provided through larger facilities. So there's a huge amount of work that's going on, and I would welcome the opportunity to return to Scrutiny as we move forward to outline that work. But it is taking time, and we are continuing to have that focus on our early years.
Thank you for that. Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you. It sounds very promising. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions, and you might have already mentioned it. Obviously, there's the children's centres in various places throughout Staffordshire. I'm fortunate we've got one in where I represent. But I'm just wondering, how do those that require help, for the want of a better word, young families, access the help apart from all the mod cons we've got, like such as IT and telephone calls? Sometimes it's that personal touch of meeting the person you want to actually speak to. And I'm just mindful that everybody hasn't got access to transport to get them from one place to another place. How do we, sorry if you've probably answered it or you know all about it, but I just want to know how you can, we as members can encourage new families, if they require any help or services, can actually get them to where they need to be, or do you do an outreach to them? That's my question. Thank you.
I think Becky and I are going to do a little bit of a joint response here to cover the different components. So in terms of children's centres particularly, we are in a very good position where we've got children's centres in some areas, but not all. And where we don't have children's centres, we do facilitate outreach. So that is where we utilise particularly community buildings, but also buildings of our partners in health to deliver our services. So particularly where the focus currently is on early years, our early years providers will deliver across the county in various buildings and different settings. We do try to be quite clear that children's centres are not just about a building, and that they are more than a building. So we do have multiple places to go, including the digital offer, but we also acknowledge that that is not everything to every family. So by using those different facilities, we are able to engage within all communities of Staffordshire. As we move forward, a little bit linked to the previous question, as we move forward with the recovery, we do hope that more and more facilities will become available to us so that we can fully restore and build upon our current provision. And I think Becky is also going to give some response as well.
Thank you. Yeah, just in relation to the family support providers specifically, so they do also operate an outreach service, and that service can be delivered anywhere. So often it is within the family home, if that's appropriate to do so. Within schools, they also operate from children's centres. So essentially the service goes to where the family needs the service to go and provides that support. Obviously, that's been quite challenging over the last 12 months with the restrictions, so they have extended a virtual offer where they can do sort of online face-to-face calls, telephone calls, etc. And our providers have also been quite inventive, so, you know, during the nicer weather particularly, Some of the support has taken place in parks, open spaces, in families' gardens, etc. So it's very much an interactive service. They are community and voluntary sector providers. They've got a real presence within their local communities. They're a trusted organisation, and they can, as I say, get out into family homes.
Right, thank you for that. I knew that you were talking earlier about people don't want to be done to, they want to be included. How do, I suppose it's a follow-on from what Councillor Perry was saying really there. Not only how do people access it, how do people know that they need it, if that makes any sense? Do we have any proactivity around, I know that we have an advertising campaign, but for example, do we take referrals from experts that may identify that some people need this sort of support? Because I suppose if you have to access this support by presenting yourself, there probably is a step before that, isn't there, that making sure that people who need it recognise they need it and then present themselves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can see that Mr. Sutton is indicating, so I don't know if you want to bring Mr. Sutton in first, and I will respond accordingly after.
Thank you for that. Councillor Sutton.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's not on the particular question that you've just answered, but it was just following on from the question that Councillor Perry raised. And anecdotally, we are aware that quite often some of the support sessions that have now been run virtually online, that the feedback from some parents is that they've actually preferred those because they are therefore not sitting, how they might perceive it, sitting in a room with other parents that might judge them, and they've been able to be more open and honest and get feedback without other people knowing exactly who they are. So there has been some positives from being able to do these things in a virtual way.
Yes, thank you for that. I suppose I just finally from me that and I think a recent Ofsted and CCG review of our SEND provision talked about some young people, and it may well be SEND young people, and it used a phrase called diminishing inclusivity. Do you think, or could we have any reassurance, or are you reassured that actually hubs will go some way to preventing this decrease in inclusivity?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, picking up the kind of the first question in relation to referrals, there is both would be an informal and formal route into referrals that currently exist. So, when I talk about informal referrals, our Children's Centre and Early Years Coordination Service engages with quite a range of partners, including our schools, and from time to time there will be informal conversations where they feel a particular family or parent may benefit from that additional kind of contact and engagement, and the service would take the opportunity to proactively engage with and work with those families. We also have formal referral routes in relation to particular services, including the Family Support Service, where organisations or individuals and families themselves can refer formally into the service, and then that process will begin linked to the early help assessment. In terms of the second question, in terms of inclusivity, we do believe, and based on kind of the national thinking around family hubs, that it presents as an opportunity to really reflect on what we do well and where we need to develop and grow. We've done some tremendous work across our children's centres, or rather the children's centre coordinators have, in relation to particularly SEND and ensuring all provision is inclusive, and also having activities which target the particular needs of our families. We want to build and grow upon that, and as part of the process we are keen to co-produce that with our families within each district through either formal mechanisms or informal mechanisms, where our families can actually help us shape what our services look like, how our hubs are run, so that we can ensure that they are as inclusive as possible, both for our families in relation to SEND, but also other key cohorts that we feel that we are missing within within all of our services.
No, thank you again. Again, very, very encouraging. Thank you. Any other comments? Councillor Sutton, is that a legacy hand or is that a new one?
No, Mr. Chairman, it's a new hand. I just wanted to pick up a little bit on the SEND issue, that questions that have just been raised. And I really do think that the enhancement of the family hubs as we go forward, particularly around early years, will help pick up and identify young people, children with development issues that may potentially manifest themselves later on in school as SEND issues. So if those things are identified earlier, as I believe the family hubs will help in that can only be a positive thing in that relation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
No, thank you. No other questions? No. Oh, sorry. Turn myself off then. Councillor Padeshi.
Thank you, Chair. Having read this, Chair, I'm sure none of us can argue that there are many positives around these family hubs, and it is welcome. There is a clear acknowledgement that early years are crucial, so it makes it even more vital that this go through. But Chair, if I could make a comment, please, before I ask a question. There's something that I don't quite understand. Over the past several years, we have had cuts to children's centres, youth services, and, unbelievably, to our health visiting services. And there is an acknowledgement throughout this report about how important these services are in terms of throwing up warning signs, putting in preventative measures to support health issues, parenting skills, warning signs around antisocial behaviour, whatever. And now we're told we're going to build it all up now with family hubs. And I honestly sometimes wonder if we're working on some sort of mini Iraq model, knock it all down and then say, don't worry, we're coming in to build it all back up. But the sad part is, Chair, in the meantime, there are children and families who have been damaged, who have been left behind, and it is permanent damage in many areas, and time will not make up for that. So that is something that we need to bear in mind. My question now, Chair, is that there seems to be a worrying over-reliance on volunteers. 319 to me is a significant figure, and I worry that a service that is going to be so reliant on volunteers could well be proved to be an unstable one. And my other comment, Chair, is as well that it's all very well putting these measures in place, but the one fundamental issue on its own that hasn't been addressed and that needs to be addressed is that poverty alone and the ripple effects it has on young lives in particular, that is something that crucially needs to be addressed. Everything else then builds on that. Thank you, Chair.
No, thank you for those comments and the question, which I'll refer in just a second. But I do think that, you know, we are not alone, not unique here as a local authority in having to deliver budget cuts. I think what we've heard today, certainly from my perspective, is 3 examples of a local authority that has recognised that and is moving forward, sometimes in a unique manner, and actually been something of a stalwart for and a vanguard for looking at doing things in a different way and perhaps providing those services in a different way. So I take the points you make, but I do think it is about how local authorities, how those authorities that are charged with the responsibility of looking after vulnerable people actually go about that. And certainly from what I've heard here today, I've been particularly impressed by the way that this council does that. I think there was a question about volunteers. I think, Joe, if you could address that, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. In terms of the volunteer question, we are always quite keen to ensure we get the right balance between permanent staffing structures and volunteers. Particularly across our early years, children's centres, family support, we have a really good take-up of volunteers who choose to take the time to support the local community. Quite often that is, we do proactive efforts, but quite often that's because members of the public are contacting us, so keen to volunteer with us and work together with our services. I think what we haven't stressed within the report or our commentary, so apologies, is that surrounding all of the services that we talk about is a staffing structure. So the children's centres have an early years coordination service where our core statutory functions are discharged through that staffing structure that enables us to ensure that we're meeting those statutory obligations and the needs of our children and families. However, within all of that, we tend to talk, and I tend to talk quite a lot about our volunteers because they really do add that added value to our service. And if we speak to any of our staff, actually, the volunteers come from a range of backgrounds, from a range of different skill sets and different knowledges. And during COVID-19, it's really helped to have volunteers, for example, who maybe have got a really young family, and aren't working at the moment but want to volunteer within the community setting. Actually, their experiences and sharing that with other families has really helped, and that particularly during COVID-19 we've seen that benefit. We've also got volunteers who maybe have retired and come from quite a professional career background, who add that added value in relation to governance, strategic direction, holding us to account to ensure that we're delivering appropriately. So I do want to provide that assurance that we do that in terms of that balance between volunteers and staffing structures. We will absolutely, Becky and I will take that away as the Family Hub develops to have those conversations appropriately with Cabinet and members around how we do that. But really the assurance is there that we do, and at the moment we think that we have got the right balance.
Thank you for that. Councillor Sutton, did you want to add anything before we close?
Yes, I will. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just picking up on the last issue that has been raised, and I think we have to remember that ensuring that people are not in poverty, is a really important aspect. And the best and the most long-term and effective way of ensuring people aren't in poverty is that there's good economic development and there's good economic recovery, particularly post the COVID, so that the citizens of Staffordshire are able to get themselves good jobs, and then are able to take their families out of poverty. And on the issue of volunteers, many of the people who volunteer within children's centres and within this area have themselves been part of having some of the services of children's centres over the years, and have seen the value of what is delivered within the community and want to add something back, and have got that experience. And people volunteer for many different reasons, but of course one of the reasons they do volunteer is to improve their own skill set as well, of adding to the community, so that they are themselves able to get back into the workplace when the time is ready. And then just ultimately, it's not necessarily how much you spend, but it's how well you spend it that matters. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
No, thank you for that. And thank you, Joe and Becky, for the report. Finally, item 7, the work programme. Helen, could you update us?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So there were a number of items that were discussed at the June meeting which have been added to the work programme, some of which have had a date identified for when they'll be considered. A lot have been added to the bottom with a date to be allocated, because obviously there's a need to try and plan the agenda appropriately so that we're trying to group together items that make sense, so children's services, adult services and so on. So we'll be looking to allocate dates to the items that you've requested. Some of the work there's crossover between some of the other committees. So, for example, one of the areas raised was the current issues that we've seen quite a bit around sexual harassment in schools. Now, colleagues in Prosperous are keen to look at that, as well as colleagues in Health. It's been requested by all three. So a sensible approach, if you're comfortable with that, and through you, Chair, would perhaps be to do a spotlight piece of work on that with a member from each of those scrutiny committees, and then report back to each of the parent committees. So if everybody's happy with that, if you give some consideration to who would like to be part of that work, then we can perhaps do that as a joint piece of work. There is, again, on the community safety that was raised, particularly about the Fishmonger Hall incident, there's some crossover there within different committees, and the Chair has got a meeting later on this month with the chair of the Police, Fire and Crime panel as well, to make sure that we're not duplicating the work there around community safety. So we'll be looking at that. And then really just to say, clearly this remains a flexible document. So whilst we're looking to allocate the various items that you've already suggested appropriately throughout the year, there is also always the opportunity for everybody to continue to put items forward, either through me or the chairman and vice chairman, as we develop the work programme throughout the year. Thank you.
Helen, thank you for that. I think there was also that issue that in the terms of reference for this committee, we are the designated crime and disorder panel. And that's something else that I'll be taking up with the Commissioner, or the Commissioner's office rather, at that meeting where we're trying to decide precisely the best committee or the best number of committees for some of these issues to be raised. Were there any questions or pointers on the work programme? No. I think that was the end. There's nothing else, is there, from the note? Lovely. Well, thank you all again for coming, and thank you for our presenters for spending the time and the detailed reports that were born. I think we certainly all appreciate that, and it's increased our knowledge no end. And I do think there, one theme that ran through them, all three, was quite an exciting way of the way that this council does or is moving forward, and actually the way that it uses some innovative new approaches, particularly around some of the more vulnerable in our community. So thank you again for all of that.